Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. If you at all pay attention to any of my lives, I love the fact that we can, no matter where we are, in wherever in the world or whatever time zone we're in, we can all come together in one place at one time and just have amazing conversation. So I'm super excited today that everyone is here on Blue TV joining me with Shelly O'Donovan. I will let her do her own introduction in a moment, but I would love to know who all is out there. So be sure to comment below, especially if you have some questions. We have some amazing conversation. Jonathan Chambliss is out there. So welcome, Jonathan. We are going to really talk about, really finding your inner superpower. And I am trying to do multiple things at one time here. So good morning, Jonathan. But I want to first kick us off with really allowing Shelly to do her own introduction. But before I do that, before I pass it on over to her, I met her through a really amazing group, which we call the Top Voices here on LinkedIn. We don't spend a whole lot of time talking about blue badges, but now you can see why it's called Blue TV, right? And the hope is that we get to uncover a little bit more about Shelly, what she's doing here in her professional world, as well as on LinkedIn, and then some good practical tips that you can take away. So with that all being said, I'm super excited to have Shelly here. Shelly, I'm going to pass it on over to you so that you can do yourself better justice than I would and introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. So for those of you who don't know me here, my name is Shelly O'Donovan, and I own a company called the Authentic Influence Group. We essentially go in and teach folks authentic influence to raise themselves up in their careers. And there are a lot of corporate folks we work with, but I started my career in politics. From there, I moved into lobbying for a big health system here in Philadelphia, and then moved on to work in the pharmaceutical industry for a long time. And so I had picked up along the way all of these skills to influence legislators, lawmakers, you name it, so that policies could get put in place to help patients, help, the pharma company as well. And what I found was that folks internally could really use these skills. And that once you start to learn those skills, whether it's nonverbal communication, how to get visible in the workplace, your career starts to grow. And folks that are really high level, they tend to get stuck, not because they don't know how to do their job, right? They're really skilled, typically very skilled, high level folks, but they get stuck with all of these particulars that we think aren't really part of our job, but honestly, it's part of your career and part of propelling you forward.
Oh, wow. So first off, amazing introduction. I knew that you worked because I had a small stint in pharmaceutical sales. So I knew you had worked in pharma. I did not realize you came from politics, which is so super cool because there are so many things based just on your introduction that we could unpack and paths we could go down that would take us off of our chosen original path. But nonetheless, one of the things I do want to ask you about, you said that there are some particulars that those executives or top level individuals within their organizations don't even know are super important. What are some of those things that you think are important that we, as owners of companies, as leaders within our corporate organizations, as founders, for any of us listening out there who are trying to elevate ourselves so as to elevate our success within our careers, what do you think we're missing?
Yeah, so there's a lot of little tactical things that add up to make big impact. But just to give you some tactical things that folks can think about right now, one thing I would think a lot about is how you're communicating. And so I tend to work with people who have really complicated, high-level things that they have to communicate, right? It's part of the messaging. They have to communicate regulatory information. It's got to be a certain way and positioned a certain way. But they get caught up in all of that. And instead of thinking about how can I communicate this in the way that the person on the other end can actually receive it? And so we do a lot of work on that from a verbal perspective, right? Verbal communication. But then the other thing is nonverbal. And so what I find is that folks tend to close in their body language easy when things get complicated and things get tough. And so I work with them for tweaks for how do we shift things? How are you being perceived versus how are you negotiating the world, and try to really open up awareness for people as well, because I think the statistic is something like 85% of executives think that they're self-aware, when it's actually only 15% that are. So there's
Wow.
a huge gap there.
Huge. That's a huge variance. And who would have thought that? Huh.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So now when you really, okay, communication was one of them. And by the way, we've got Michelle Hayward out there and Nikki Estes is out there. So we appreciate you both being along with Jonathan. So good morning to everyone. We're talking really, well, the goal is to talk about how to find our inner superpower. But we started really just having excuse me, Shelly. I was looking at Michelle's name on the screen. Having Shelly introduce herself, and there was just so much goodness there to start to dive into. And one of the things she had mentioned was there are really some key areas that we as leaders don't always really know that we're missing out on. And one of the things was, how to communicate effectively, which I think is a really good segue into, the superpower. So, because I do think there's got to be a correlation between how we are perceived, how we perceive how others perceive us, and then our superpower. So how did you start really focusing? Why did you start shifting your focus to the superpower?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think what happened for me was I went on a lobbying trip up to Harrisburg, our state capital, and I was part of this group, this like roundtable group. And you walk the halls, essentially, you pitch whatever the policy is that you're trying to pitch and get changed, and you spend the day there talking about it, trying to drum up support for whatever it is. And so I was representing some folks on the pharma side. And I went up and we walked into this one office, and there was a gentleman who was a new state rep from Philadelphia. And we walked in the office, and suddenly I watched the room, and everybody sat up a little higher. Everybody opened up a little more. He was incredibly engaging. So he was talking to people. He was putting out his body language. And I had just learned a lot about body language at that point. I was in like a very intense program from a behavioral research lab. And I watched this guy open up the room. And, he had almost no power in the legislature at that point in time. He was a new representative. He had folks in the room from both sides of, both parties. And he was able to just take that room. And even when we walked out, I was talking to folks that were with me. We were talking about him, and the comments were just like, wow, that guy's really impressive. And it was just this welcoming approach in his body language and how he made eye contact with folks. And it really is this game changer. It really opens up the world for you a little bit further. But sometimes folks struggle with it, either in their personality, or they get into a situation that's really stressful, and it's natural to close up when you're in those situations. So I work with people to help move that dial a little bit further. But there's also a number of other things that I work with them just to give them more visibility in that corporate setting, typically too.
And I do want to unlock some of that goodness there, but I want to go back to this concept of superpower. So for me, I would think, and you tell me if I'm wrong, uncovering my superpower. So in this instance, you use this gentleman, this guy
Right.
who is now represented, or who was a new representative at the time, that didn't have much power or pull, yet when he walked in the room, he commanded almost this presence. So his superpower to me was probably his confidence and his ability to exude this, whatever that feeling is, right? So I'm guessing, and I can tell you from a personal perspective, that once I've uncovered my superpower, it truly helped me build confidence. So I'm guessing when you understand your superpower, even if that is not communication, even if it isn't in the same way that this gentleman commanded this respect. Maybe that's the best way. Maybe it was just the air in which he felt confident, so everyone else wanted to be confident. Look, I keep lifting myself up like like I'm supposed to be in that room, right? But I'm guessing that once you uncover a superpower, regardless of what that is, that it helps build this level of confidence. Is that what you are striving
Absolutely.
towards?
Absolutely. And I think it's important. Sometimes we have parts of our personality that we kind of shy away from because we think the world's not going to like that, or it's not going to, and you really have to lean into it a bit and open things up a little bit. Sometimes leaning into who you are is, people are so much more attracted to who you actually are when you can have the confidence to put that out into the world. And I think that's one of the things I help people with is just to be comfortable with that, like with being able to be who they are. And I'm not saying that, that gives you the right to go in and be a jerk or something like that, right? Not at all. But just those little things that we tend to hide because we're nervous or we're fearful or we're trying to be likable. When in actuality, if you just pull those out a little bit more and pull out more of who you are, find your superpower, it's just going to propel you forward so much more.
Okay, so what is your superpower? I want to know.
Yeah, so that's really interesting question. And so for me, it's really teaching other people and helping others unlock their authentic influence. So I'm a strong believer in that if you kind of fake things and you don't do it in an authentic way, like that shows through. And so if you're an introvert, like you're never going to probably be the most extroverted person in the room. It's just not in alignment with your personality. But you bring so much value in the skills that you have. So we just have to find those and kind of dust those off and make sure that those are coming through as well, so that you can be recognized for all the positive things that you bring.
I couldn't agree more. So tell me then, and I love your superpower, by the way. I think mine is, oh, not I think,
I
I
was
know.
going to ask you, yeah.
Yeah, what mine was. Well, and let me say that just the beauty in being able to articulate yourself, what your superpower is I think amazing too, right? It's one thing to go through the process of uncovering it, and it's another to talk about it confidently, right? Like you
Absolutely.
know it, right? And I know my superpower is asking questions, right? I am curious and I ask questions to get to probable root cause. So I ask sometimes the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth level questions.
I love that.
And then I get to listen. So I actively listen, and I can then regurgitate. That's not really the right word I was looking for, but I can summarize it back in a much more simplified way. And sometimes, or a lot of times, when you start to ask those second, third, fourth line questions, people don't even know until you start asking really what the probable root cause is. And so when you can then take that and summarize it back really easily to them, more simplified, it's like a light bulb goes off, and it's super cool to watch that happen. So I love that. That's what I thrive in doing.
Yeah. The one thing you said that I think is so interesting is that you said you listen. And what I have found is that we all think that we listen a lot. But most people, and I'm guilty of this myself at times, listen to speak again. And so the fact that you've honed that ability to just actually sit and listen to what's happening in a conversation and then have the curiosity to follow it up is amazing and incredible. And I often tell folks to be mindful of that, because if you and I are having a conversation, let's say we're at a networking event and I'm a little nervous, like I might be sitting there so much thinking about like, what am I going to say next so that I look cool in front of her? And I miss so much of the value of what you're saying. And in all actuality, if I just sit and listen to you, the words will come when they need to come out of my mouth. Like I don't have to be strategizing, but we get so caught up in, I hope somebody likes me, or I hope I look the part. And so I love that. That's your superpower.
Oh, thank you. But you know what I think you just really summarized there to me was it's about being present and in the moment, which I think we all struggle with, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even some of us who have worked really hard to get to that space, It's sometimes you get distracted with just, everyday life and the normal emotions that we as people feel on a regular basis, right? And sometimes you can be the most confident person, and then you walk into this room, and for whatever reason, maybe it's that you have a zit on your face, or maybe you have a tear in your hose, or maybe it's your hair is in a funky spot and you can't fix it, or who knows what it is, but it's just one little thing that can take you off of the that can kind of push you over the edge and make you worry so much so that you're not really present in the moment. So you've lost all that confidence. And that happens to all of us, I think. So
yeah, and I love that you're bringing that up, because I think that sometimes people struggle with the fact that, oh, I'm not confident. And that's not true. You probably have moments, like everyone does, right? I'm no different. I have moments where I'm not feeling confident in whatever the thing is. And so I tell folks, like, just remember, like, if you have a big presentation to give, or you have something big coming up, like, you only need to bring the confidence for that slice of time. And hopefully you can recharge it. And at some point over time of doing whatever that thing is over and over again, like, hopefully that confidence gets bigger and it kind of gets bridged together. But I think we get so caught up in this, like, I've got to be on top of it all the time. And it's just it's not human, right? It's not realistic.
well, and the reality is, when you're worried about it, the next person next to you that you're engaging with is probably worried about it as well. If we all just put that aside and just came as our organic, our natural selves and had fun,
Yes.
and, not worried so much about what everyone else, because the reality is people don't think about you as much as you think they think about you,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So the things that you're worried about the most at that moment that are causing you to feel this lack of confidence, they're probably not even thinking about, because they got their own shit that they're worried
Exactly.
about.
Yeah.
Shit.
Totally right, though. Yes. And that's why, if you can just zone into somebody and try to see what they're saying and what they're communicating, even from a nonverbal perspective, you get so much information.
I agree. So is that when you're working with someone who, especially when we're talking about communicating, they've got to communicate, as you mentioned, something that is so important and valuable, and the way they communicate it, the words that they use to communicate with. When you're working with someone who maybe it's not anything to do, maybe their superpower again isn't anything to do with communicating, right? And so now
Right.
you're trying to help them build that confidence. What are some of the small things? I know I just heard you say it's about, listening to that person, but what if they're about to be the communicator, or where everyone else is listening? How do you give them little tips to maybe
Yeah.
build that confidence before they have to open their mouth?
Yeah. So the one thing I teach them is, like, don't wait for the moment. Like, I tell people, if you're trying to work on body language or something, like, try it when you go in to order a cup of coffee at Starbucks. Like, start talking to people a little bit more in your day to day, because that is such low stakes, right? If somebody looks at you funny, it's not a big deal. But they actually did this really interesting study where they took violin players. And so I think the researchers were Kobitz and Platz are their names. And they
Okay.
took violin players, like 5 violin players or something. They had music piped in the back. So officially they were all playing the same exact tune. And they had them walk on stage, and some of them nodded to the audience, and they acknowledged the audience in a nonverbal way before they actually sat down to play. And some didn't. And they found that those who actually acknowledged the audience, who came out looking more confident, they actually made a better impression, and people thought that they were playing better, but it was the exact same music. So they weren't playing any
They
better.
weren't playing any better than anyone else.
No.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of that I don't want to tell you to fake it, but you do sometimes have to just get yourself excited. If you're nervous, there's tons of research to suggest that if you just flip your mind a little bit and reframe it as, I'm excited to do this thing, that opens so much up for you. And so there's a little bit of fighting against yourself you might have to do in those moments when you're not feeling confident.
Yeah. And I know personally, even, I mean, for those of those of you who are out there who know, I am always on LinkedIn and I haven't been, which means I'm going through some challenges myself. And so in order for me to show up in moments like this, I've got to say, okay, I have to flip the switch like you just said. And I have to say, okay, I am whatever I'm struggling with for this brief moment, I'm going to let it go. I'm going to give it up because I want to be present and in the moment. And I want to enjoy the time here with Shelly and the audience that's out there, And so it is really about, and I may have been, crying or stressed out or whatever. I mean, I really wasn't crying, but you get what I mean. I mean, it's just having to have that conversation with yourself. And that doesn't work all the time, obviously.
Right.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have moments where we have to work on things, right? But the reality is, if you just try really hard to flip the switch, you can come on and be prepared for just about anything at that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always say too, if you have you have something happen that's just like a really shaking event or whatever, like people on the other side are usually very open to, and everybody has challenges in their life. So, I'll never forget working with a client and something had happened right before they were about to go in for a big presentation and they were really upset. And I said, you obviously you can go in and still give this, but there's a point at which you can turn to your boss and say, "Hey, I just want you to know this thing happened. Like I'm a little off my game." And so that even just saying that to the boss, I actually ended up going in and doing a great presentation and everything worked out. But just having that little bit of support from their boss went a long way.
That's awesome. Okay, so then you do more than just helping them find their superpower, which I think is a core component of helping build someone's confidence. But we're talking about, helping them to become thought leaders, right?
Right.
There's a lot, I'm sure, that is involved in that. It's probably not just an easy 2-minute response, but how do you, th- what do you think prevents people from stepping into that thought leadership role?
That's interesting. I think it's a little different for different people, and certainly we sometimes make excuses for ourselves. Like we might say, "Hey, well, I can't be a leader here because they already have the structure or whatever that looks like and whatever that excuse is." So it's all
Imposter
about
syndrome.
opening up those things and kind of pulling them away, right? And trying to help them realize, okay, this might be holding you back. Like you actually may be holding yourself back. Or maybe it's a relationship with someone. So in different structures, you have different reporting relationships, different peer relationships, and sometimes that can be problematic as well. So I help them to look at people's personalities as well so that they don't feel that the boss is just difficult. Maybe they realize, oh, the boss is just really detail oriented, and I'm not a super detail oriented person. So that's why we're having a little bit of friction there. What
Mhm.
can I do to change that a little bit? And can I actually have an honest conversation with the boss to say, listen, I am not the most detail oriented person, but I'm going to do my best for you. And this is what I'm going to do. Does that work? So it's really about looking at it in a little bit of a different way so that you can open things up.
I agree. My experience here, we all know that, for most of us who are out there watching on LinkedIn, we're active in one way or another. Otherwise, you wouldn't be on the show, in the audience, on the show, watching on team replay, whatever that may be, right? And I think that for me, where I started to not feel, when I first started, it was, as Jonathan said, fear that held me back from posting content. And once I started to post content, it wasn't really good at the beginning, but but I started to, and I was fearful because I didn't want to be considered a thought leader. And I didn't think I could because I had this imposter syndrome, right? And what I realized was the more I started to have the conversations, the more I started to put content out, the more comfortable I started to feel, and the more the easier it was to step into this thought leadership without really even considering myself a thought leader, which quite honestly, I don't know whether I am or not anyway. That's not the point. The point is before I used to worry about it, right? And now I don't really worry about it anymore because it was the act of, not actually fake it till you make it. I mean, you alluded to, maybe not that. And it wasn't really a fake it till you make it. It was stepping into what I knew I could do and forcing myself to do it, even when it felt uncomfortable, so that I got better and better and better at it. I mean, my content probably still needs to get better, and there's still always something to do to evolve and elevate, but I can step into it easier because I forced myself to continue to do it more and more and more.
Yeah, what I like that you said there was you got uncomfortable, and I think that's the key too. At some point, I was working with a client once and we were talking about this, and he said, I learned to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And I think that's right on the mark, because if you're not uncomfortable with what you're doing, the most likely you're not, growing. You're not at that growth point. And I was the same way as you when I started putting stuff out there. I was so embarrassed. I would put the video up and then I would like go for a run and I would totally get off LinkedIn for a while because I was like, what if anybody sees this? And it just takes consistency too. I think that's the big thing, because you learn from the folks that are giving you feedback. You learn what works. You learn what you like. And most of the stuff that I post is because I'm interested in it, or client or a friend said something and it gave me an idea. So I kind of geek out on human behavior and why people do the things they do. It's so interesting to me because we're all so different from one another.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's my take on it. But I'd be interested, what do you think was the big like growth moment for you over your LinkedIn path?
You know what? So that's a hard question for me to answer, I think. But if I'm being honest, I think my growth moment was when I started to show up so I don't like video. I mean, you would think I love video because I do shows and I generate usually, except I've been on a little hiatus, right? But I generate at least 2 to 4 videos a week usually that are, individual that I just post. You would think I would love video, but I think where I started to grow the most was when I started to do more and more video. The reason why I don't like video is not anything to do with messaging. It's that I don't love the person that's looking back at sometimes. Like, I don't love the person that I see sometimes, right? Because I see all the imperfections, right? And I spend a lot of time focused on that. But once I let those, for me, letting go of even those physical imperfections allowed me to let go of just some of the messaging, like the need to be a perfectionist, right? Allowed me. And once I could let that go, I started to spend less time thinking about concept, thinking about posting, thinking about commenting, and I actually started executing. And the more I executed on a regular basis, which also meant I had to do videos all the time, because that was the better I got at my messaging. And now I don't even have to think really hard. I mean, I still have days when, you're not really in the moment, right? And you don't really want to, you can't think of something, but for the most part, it's really easy for me to generate content because I feel confident in my messaging now, because I found my lane. But I wouldn't have done that if I wouldn't have forced myself, like you said, to feel uncomfortable, right? If I didn't do the video and make myself see my imperfections and realize that my physical imperfections are also in my content, and that's okay. I don't have to be perfect. People are going to love you for who you are, not necessarily every word that you put on LinkedIn, or every statement that you make, or every perception or opinion that you have. It's going to be you, the inner you. That's what people care about the most.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, there are very few people who like to see themselves on
Oh
video.
no, that's what Michelle said too.
Think that's such a common theme. And so I think you're in good company there. And I think most of us have just decided, like, okay, I guess they're gonna see me today, like, even though whatever doesn't look the way I want it to look. But yeah, absolutely.
But what about you then? What has been maybe the most profound growth that you've had here? What
Oh,
did you do to really harness that?
Yeah, I just kept consistently posting. And early on, I hired someone who really was focused. He was a retired like sales coach, and he was really focused on just getting me to post content. And he would literally like reach out to me and he would be like, "Did you post something today?" And then he would give me a little bit of feedback too, in terms of, that looks good, or can maybe check this a little bit, but it was always positive feedback too. And that was helpful in just building my confidence to put my stuff out there. And then at some point, right, you find your audience and people are commenting, and that gives you like a boost as well.
It does give you a boost. It is amazing when you can have people engaging, but that also means that sometimes something to remind ourselves though is sometimes when we're just starting down or embarking on, or maybe the algorithm, you haven't been posting in a while, and you're coming back, we are not also defined by those comments either. So if for some reason something happens and we don't have people commenting, while it's great and amazing and helps us continue the conversation and build more confidence and feel validated, if we don't have all those comments either, it's okay. It takes a little bit of time to get there, right?
It does, absolutely. And you all know this, like the amount of followers, the amount of whatever you have doesn't necessarily equal the business that you're trying to get either. So, it's really important that you're serving whatever that angle that you're trying to serve is in your client base, so that that can hopefully help you to build your business on the back end.
I agree. I agree. Okay, so I don't want to forget about the amazing people who are out here having some good conversation, which we have just been so intense in our convo that we have not really. I've been posting everyone's comments, but we haven't really been diving into them. I want to say for a brief moment, Jonathan, and it's going to tear me up. I really appreciate that you said that, not because it's about me, but because I think we all have to do a better job of giving ourselves grace and being kind, because when we do that, we can show up as our true self, as you've been talking about, Shelly. And so I appreciate, Jonathan, that you said that, but I've loved the conversation. If you look at I think one of the questions, or where was it? I'm going back up. Hold on. Michelle said reframing works well for her when we were talking about that. Why does it say? Okay, there we go. Reframing works well for me. And then I think Nikki asked Michelle, how do you help those that you mentor to reframe? And then Michelle said she helps them reframe by approaching and designing engineers with, how can I help you? What can I do to make your job easier? They can decenter the client, but center the employees, then the employees will center the clients. I love that. I mean, I think there's some amazing conversation happening, and I am so super excited and appreciative that you guys are having that. So I did not want to disregard all the amazing conversations that are happening. I know, this was a great segue, because the purpose of Blue TV, as I mentioned, was to most certainly feature and highlight some amazing people like Shelly, and all the things that she's doing. But how have we been doing this on LinkedIn? And I think what I'm hearing you say, Shelly, is that it takes feeling uncomfortable and really being consistent. So what does consistent mean to you? If you were looking back on, what your consistency is, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit. And I definitely go in up and downs with the consistency. But, at first it was posting, I would think I was posting like 3 times a week. Then I was posting like more. And then I would do some weekend posting. Essentially it's just being consistent with when you post, like making sure you get it out every week and a certain number of times. That said, also just consistently thinking of what could I post? Like, so even if it's like, 8 o'clock at night, I'm not going to post anything, but I have an idea. I might put it in my journal or something just so that I catch it. Cause so many ideas happen like when you're in the shower or you're doing something else that has nothing to do with work stuff. So that for me has been important, just that consistency. And I don't know about you, but I have a lot of people in my life that help to keep me consistent. So, I have a business coach. I sometimes have a woman who just helps me reframe things myself, like in my personal life. And that practice is just so incredibly useful when you have someone, my best friend who I was, helping me this week with something. And she was just like, well, let's look at it this way. And those kind of people in your life can be just incredible. And I do that for a lot of my clients, but it's hard to do it for yourself. So you always need someone else to help with those types of things.
I call that an accountability coach, right? And it doesn't have to be a coach like a paid coach. It doesn't have to be someone you have to go seek out and find. It could be your next door neighbor. It could be your neighbor if you sit in a cubicle, your neighbor next to you. It could be it could be your husband, your wife. It could be your children. It could be someone. Just find someone
Yes.
that helps you. Look, the reality is, you tell me if I'm wrong, Shelly, but there are a lot of things that we have to hold ourselves accountable for. You
Yeah.
can't really rely on everyone to hold you accountable for everything. There is some amount of responsibility we have to take. But the reality is that if we are good at what we are doing, we are holding ourselves accountable to a higher standard than most other people. And in order to then get above, go the extra mile, we have to rely on others to help us to be accountable in those areas that really take us to the next level, because we're already managing so much already. So I think it's so important to find people that people call it a tribe. Some call it, just your friends. Some call it a coach, whatever that is to you. I think it's so important to find someone that can hold you accountable. And I love that you have so many people supporting you that you can reach out to.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I do that for folks too, right? So I've got plenty of folks that I do that for as well. And it's just easier to look at things sometimes when it's on somebody else. Or sometimes you can trick yourself and say, well, what would I say to my best friend about this if this were her? And you realize pretty quickly, like, you would never talk to anyone else like that, right?
Yes. Yes. That goes back to being kind
Yes.
to yourself too, right? I love
Yeah.
that. All right. So consistency, being our authentic selves, consistency, really pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone, being uncomfortable. Anything else that you think that is really important for those that are listening as practical tips that they can take away from today as it relates to LinkedIn, and then maybe even finding your inner superpower?
Yeah. So I would say, from a LinkedIn perspective, the other thing is to support other people. So I
Mhm.
have met so many folks on LinkedIn, that just, even I might support them just for a few months, like liking their content and talking to them, because I think that they're interesting people and they're doing interesting things. And it may or may not even have any impact on what I'm doing, right? It might just be that I
Mhm.
happen on them. And I think that's really important, to support each other and to help each other grow. And then in terms of superpower, the other thing is just to think about what people come to you and ask you, either for advice, or what do people come to you and ask you to do, whether it's paid stuff or not paid stuff. I used to work in a policy department in big pharma, and one of my colleagues was a lawyer, but everyone came to her for writing advice on the team. And it became really clear to me, wow, like, she is just an incredible writer. And that's
Mhm.
really, to me, that was one of her superpowers. And so if you can think about, what do people come to me? What do they ask? What do folks give me compliments on?
So I'd love in the comments below, whether you're team live or team replay, to let us know what you think your superpower is. And if you don't know what your superpower is, I urge you to really reach out to Shelly, because I think that when we go through this life, and we only get one shot at it, when we go through this life without realizing what our superpower is, I think we miss out on so much satisfaction, so much success, and we miss out on the opportunity to share with others what our gifts are, because the reality is that people like us with our gifts. I mean, it's just sometimes the simplest thing to us, but the hardest thing for someone else. And when we can help them be better people, help them live better versions of their lives, we're doing that for ourselves all at the same time. I think it's so important. So reach out to Shelly. In fact, Shelly, where's the best place to find you if should anyone want to reach out to you
Yeah,
directly?
so the best place to find me is here on LinkedIn. That's the easiest place to track me down. If you happen to be in New York next week, to reach out to me. I've got an event up there. We might be able to get you a seat to the
Oh, yeah.
event. But find me on LinkedIn. Hit me up in my DMs if you'd like, or at least connect or follow me. And yeah, I give out tips a lot, video tips. So little nuggets that hopefully can help you get through your day at work.
Awesome. And I don't want to disregard Jonathan's question to you, Shelly, which was he wanted to know more about your experience working in deep tech where regulatory boundaries stifle innovation. What are your 2 cents on that?
Yes. So that is a big question.
Not probably not enough for us to cover, right?
I could do a whole segment on that. I will say that, the regulatory and legislative political environment, all of that is so challenging. Sometimes it's there for the right reason. And I always used to say this when I worked in policy, that you can have the best intentions and you put a policy in place, and unfortunately, it has some ramification somewhere else that you never realized it was going to have. And then all of a sudden, you've got a problem down the stream.
Mhm.
So those kind of things are so challenging. And I think that folks that work in the regulatory and policy environment, they're such great investigative reporters, right? They're always looking at, like, how can I solve this problem? If this doesn't work, can we try something else? And what that looks like. And that's the only thing I can tell you. And that, like, regulatory, you have to do so much research about what's happening and keep on top of it. But I think that a lot of the smaller companies can innovate a little bit quicker because they don't always have the bigger hurdles that the bigger companies do. That said, they're incredible, Fortune 500 companies, big companies out there making incredible strides. So I'm happy to talk offline to him too about it, because it's probably a long conversation.
He said, good answer. Thanks for that question, Jonathan. And I think that's a great opportunity for you guys to talk offline. I think, that could be a whole nother session where we talk about the fact, even if you look in terms of AI and, I know that this fear of putting compliance policies in place are really going to stifle innovation, when in actuality, I think it may do a little bit of stifling when they first start to get implemented. But I do think that we need ethical and responsible AI, and we need to ensure that our privacies are protected. And there's so much centered around that. But nonetheless, we're kind of we're digressing.
Yeah.
So I want to thank everyone for being here today. I've had a tremendous amount of fun. I know we started talking about your inner superpower, but how do you leverage that to make a greater impact? That is really something Shelly can help with. And she's done this time and time again on LinkedIn. She shares a lot of great information. I think some practical tips that we got out of this was really just showing up and being authentic, really in being consistent, and pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, being comfortable with being uncomfortable. I want to thank everyone who is out there today. I appreciate Nikki, Jonathan, Michelle, anyone else who was participating in the conversation. I want to also thank Market Me More and Top Voices Unite for sponsoring this show. I thank Michelle for having been on last week. I'm looking forward to our guest next week. I want to thank you, Shelly, for being here. I appreciate your time. I love the conversation that we've had. You can also, Nikki's put some, the Silent Edge registration. Yes. So the Silent Edge is the conference that Shelly just barely referenced.
Yes.
That's doing in New York City next week, which sounds super, uber cool. So be sure to reach out. You can click on these links if should you be interested in attending. Reach out to Shelly. Otherwise, come back next week for another live show on Blue TV. I want to thank everyone from the bottom of my heart for being here. Shelly, I appreciate you. Michelle, Nikki, Jonathan, I appreciate you guys. I want to wish everyone a wonderful rest of your Thursday and a phenomenal weekend. And as we start to, anything else before I go that you want to leave everyone with?
No, I think it's been fantastic. I just hope that folks take the confidence and unleash that superpower that they have.
I love that. All right. I'm going to play some music as we go so it isn't so weird and uncomfortable. And again, thank you, everyone.